Hello, everyone. Today we have Bob Osborn and Bennett Kashdan with us, giving us a briefing on cruising Maine. I'm going to ask everyone to keep your video off and to keep muted. That just helps anyone with low bandwidth. If you do have questions during the webinar, go ahead and type them in the chat box that I've opened. If you don't see the chat box, you might want to hover your mouse over either the top or the bottom of your screen and just click on chat. Go ahead and type those questions in for Bob and Bennett, and they're going to address them either when they see them or perhaps at the end of the discussion. So let's go ahead and get going. I'm going to hand things over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, welcome everyone. I am particularly excited about talking about this year's Downeast rally. We actually have a record number of boats. We think we're going to end up with about 30. That's going to cause us some rather challenging issues up in Maine of having places with enough space for everyone. But it looks like Maine is going to be really busy this summer, but it should be a lot of fun. I may have lost count, but I think this will be my 16th visit to Maine. And the fact that I haven't been there in about 5 years, well, once. I was there 3 years ago. I was going there every year till I retired. But since then, we've been spending much more time in the Caribbean. And I mention that because if it weren't so cold in the water in Maine, or it weren't so cold in the winter in Maine, I would like that better than the Caribbean. It's just wonderful. My wife Brenda and I live here in Connecticut and love staying home. And but making a visit to Maine is always a treat. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today is the plans leaving in Hampton and also from Annapolis. But I thought at first I would just write down who's who, and don't worry so much about this because all this information is in the skipper information. I am the rally director and also port officer for Antigua, and I'm acting as port officer for Newport for this trip. And I'm sorry, Rockland, excuse me. Hampton, Bill Wary is going to be helping you folks in Hampton. And then one of your fellow rally participants, David Denzel, is offered to help coordinate things down in Annapolis. And he just reached out to all of you, I think, last night. And then, as I mentioned, Newport, but I was wrong, it's Bennett. Bennett's on, he'll be talking a little bit about what we have planned. And then, of course, General Questions, Tatcha, who handles a lot of the nuts and bolts and keeps the train on the track. Get myself to the next slide here. Okay, so I'm going to sort of walk through things bit by bit, just to give you a sense. Half the fleet, or about a third of the fleet, is leaving from Annapolis, and I just wanted to note the distances. Obviously, you're going to be going up towards the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. It's about 40 miles. And then once you cross over, there is a spot if you decide to stop along the way. You're going to want to think hard about the distances and catch the tide. As a rule of thumb, what I try to do when I make this run is to time it so that the flood, which runs from west to east in the canal, I time it so that I catch the flood and I reach the easternmost end of the canal where it goes into the Delaware at about slack tide and carry the ebb down the river. Don't try to beat that tide either way. Go with the tide or wait. I think the way the timing is set up, there's adequate time to make that run. You might want to stop in this little basin, which is just at the western end of the canal. Be aware that there's a shoal just as you enter there. I have 6.5 foot draft and I can only make it through if I hug the eastern part. But the canal is about 15 miles long and then dumps into the river going south. I'm not going to go into much detail except to say, as you go down the river, you can see it's very complicated in terms of shoaling and so forth. It looks worse than it is because, of course, the scale is quite large, but it's a busy place. There's a lot of big boats going up and down. Most of the time, they tend to follow the tide with you. And the key I wanted to note is it's tempting to go far outside of the channel and stay away from the ships, but don't do that because you're going to run into spots where you'll be at a dead end and you won't be able to get out because a lot of dredging goes on constantly. So there's big spoil areas that you can see over here where it can be less than 5 feet deep. And you don't want to get yourself on the wrong side and end up being caught in spoils. So whether you go out past Cape May or out past the Delmarva Peninsula, it's about 350 miles up to Newport. And as a general rule, the winds, the prevailing winds this time of year for the southwest. And if anything, you're likely to have not enough wind. So be sure you have adequate amount of fuel on board. For me, it's about 2 full days, 2 full nights and 2.5 days to make this trip, depending upon the speed of your boat. So you'll want to check tide charts, and then also be aware that you're going to be passing 2 major shipping areas going in and out of the Delaware and in and out of New York. The good news is hopefully most of you have AIS, send and receive, and that makes a really terrific way to keep track of who's coming along and where. So just a brief look at the itinerary. July 7th, meet in Hampton or Annapolis. July 8th will be time to leave. There'll be a dinner probably, or in both cases, being organized by the port officers, and then plan on leaving the very next day. Keep in mind that we built a few days here and there into the itinerary, and so that in the case of weather issues, we can adjust our itinerary. But on or about the 10th, the folks we're recommending, the boats that are going to be departing from Newport, it's about 1/3 of the fleet should plan on arriving in Newport, and Bennett will be talking more about the plans for that. And then following by the 11th, Chesapeake boats should start arriving. And then we'll have our group events on July 12th. We'll begin, and again, it's 350 miles to Newport. And I show this as the approach. Note the purple area, that is the shipping channel. That purple area is an exclusion zone, meaning that boats going inbound are on the right and outbound on the left. And you're going to want to think about possibly, if you need to, if you're arriving in the dark, one option is to come here and anchor inside of Point Judith in the Harbor of Refuge if you choose to do so. But it's a pretty straightforward entrance. You're going to be going likely to the west of Block Island, to the east of Block Island, to the southeast, or there's 4 or 5 big wind generators, and make sure your charts are up to date and have those on it. But the Bennett has noted here, this number 5 is a harbor of anchorage. There's a number of places to anchor or pick up moorings. We're going to focus on the Newport Harbor areas 1 and 2. And if any of you think that we're still going to Dutch Harbor, check the captain's information. That was something left over from last year. And then you can conceivably pick up a mooring here if you chose to, but then you have to take a ferry to get into Newport. But it's a really wonderful area and has a tremendous, beautiful history, magnificent homes and hotels lining the water. It's the Newport headquarters of the New York Yacht Club. This was actually a summer home for the Brown family, founders of Brown University. They made their money running opium to China. And then, of course, this is Newport. It is a wonderful place. It's a busy harbor. You'll see amazing boats. I was just up there the other day and saw the famous racing boat Bolero. And you see Ticonderoga, who makes her home there for the summer. It is terrific. So I'm going to ask Bennett to talk a little bit about some of the plans for Newport in the next couple of slides before I take over. Bennett?
Okay. Bob, you can hear me okay?
I can.
Good. Okay, thanks. Welcome, everybody. And I just want to pick up on Newport, Cuttyhunk, and Mattapoisett. So first, Newport. The anchorage, as Bob mentioned, it's in front of Ida Lewis Yacht Club. It's the circle that's to the south. Thank you, Bob. And then that's an anchorage that normally on the weekend gets crowded, but during the week stays pretty quiet. We have a pretty big fleet. So you'll see the strategy that we're going to try to employ in just a moment. I just want to give you the lay of the lands. The alternative anchorage, which also has some moorings, is up there. Thank you, Bob. And that is, it's north of Goat Island. You go around outside Goat Island. The causeway you can't pass through except in a dinghy. So you're going to be west of Goat Island to get up there. It's a little deeper. It's a little more exposed, especially to the southwest. But it's a totally viable anchorage. It also has some moorings, but I don't think anybody monitors them or rents them. I'm not sure. We're going to look into all the mooring situations as the rally gets closer. The moorings that I listed are Newport moorings, Old Port, and Cove, as well as the Harbor Master has moorings. All of those are in play. And again, I'll go over that in just a second. There's another one with shallow drafts, Cove moorings. The marinas are really, really expensive. So anybody that wants to can, but you've been forewarned. And both moorings and moorings and slips can be rented, but not necessarily ahead of time. So that's a problem. It's usually first come, first serve. And I will be answering those questions as we get along here that popped up, but let's hold it for the end if you don't mind. Alternate anchorage I mentioned. So Bob, next slide, please. The way we're going to try to do this and make it doable for this number of boats is rely on our communications. So this is to be continued. Again, a lot of this is going to be developed right up until the rally gets here. It's going to be a combination of email, sending updates to you folks, cell phones, or messaging. And so we will hone that, trust us. There'll be some real-time communication about what the anchorage is like, what both anchorages are like, and coordination with our mooring partners, which are being developed now. The local boats, the ones from Narragansett Bay, have options that include not coming until the morning of the 11th, but we're not encouraging that because we want everybody to participate. So there are options. We can talk about that further as we get along. We might have we probably will have a Saturday night, that's the 10th, I believe, get together at King Park in Newport, and people that want to get there can do that with a carpool, for example, but to be developed. We want everybody participating throughout the whole rally. So the 10th, the boats come, and some of them will come on the 11th. In any case, that night from the 10th to the 11th, we'll have the issue of where are we putting people. By the 11th, that's Sunday, we expect that the traffic that is in the anchorage will slowly leave, and that more people who want to anchor, if there were limitations, they will be relieved. So on the 11th and 12th, it should be a better situation. The 13th, we depart to Cuttyhunk. So next slide, please. More of the same, so you can skip that if you don't want.
A duplicate slide, never mind.
Okay, so the trip from the bay to Cuttyhunk, again, a very nice, often downwind sail. And when you get to Cuttyhunk area, let's just go to the next slide. I think it depicts it a little more closely. Yeah, so the arrow shows the sow and pigs reef, which you need to keep to starboard. There's a buoy out further. It's about 2 miles out, and that's the red sow and pigs reef marker. I think it's number 36. But anyway, it's very obvious that you need to leave that to starboard, and stay off of it. If you're coming from the ocean, like if you missed the Newport activities, it's even more important that you stay out. You're going to see Cuttyhunk and want to get there, but don't go around it. That's an example. The first time we passed through on our boat, that was a boat that was sunk and was about to be towed. You can see the tow line as it was lifted up. Next slide, please. Cuttyhunk. So it's beautiful. It's like a teeny weeny block island. It's just really a gem. It's at the far west of the Elizabeth Islands, which is the chain that comes off from Woods Hole. There's an inner anchorage, which Bob could point out, and there are many, many moorings. And there are also there's room for about 10 or 12 boats in the back of the inner harbor to anchor. It's a little bit iffy on the holding in big winds, but it's pretty okay. I mean, we've never dragged back there. And then outside, the whole outside, every year I come back, there's more and more moorings. So there are huge numbers of moorings outside, easy to pick up, just pick them up and they'll come find you. Or there is a huge amount of anchorage. Anchoring room exists out there in a number of places. We'll go over more of that in the briefings. That's just a photo a little closer of boats at anchor and on moorings on the right outside with I think it's the very back of the anchorage where boats are, it's too shallow for any boats to be. Next slide. Cuttyhunk to Mattapoisett. Another pretty easy, not too bad, couple hour sail. I should point out that Cuttyhunk is how we're gonna have a great lobster dinner, which people have really enjoyed. We'll get more information to you about that. But you don't have to go to Cuttyhunk. We want you to come. But if you decide you want to go somewhere else, like the west side of Martha's Vineyard, or you want to go to Woods Hole or Quicks Harbor, or what, you know, one of those places that are also idyllic, you have that option. But getting to Mattapoisett for our one night there is, next slide, please. That is where we're all going to meet before we go through the canal. So my last bit of business is to describe for a minute what's going on, 30 seconds. You come in, it's very wide open, very easy, follow the buoys. You can cut the first one, but just keep your eye on the chart. From there on, you're just straight in, and there's a large anchorage to the left, and there's tons of moorings that we have the yacht club, and we're going to give you instructions for how to get those moorings, but you can also anchor. We'll have developing as a dinner, either a potluck or some catered thing that night, and there's a briefing, a weather briefing. So I think that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to Bob.
All right. Thank you, Bennett. Bennett is suggesting there's a variety of places you can anchor. Keep in mind, though, that you're not going to want to leave your new friends. And I encourage you to stay in Cuttyhunk, even if you have been there before. There is nothing quite like being inside that little anchorage. And we'll be midweek, so it shouldn't be too crowded. But the boats are so close, you can almost touch each other. But it's pretty remarkable success. And during the evening, there's a boat that comes around. You may have seen in restaurants, Cuttyhunk oysters. That's where they're from. And they're really wonderful. So the next day, leaving from Mattapoisett, the tide turns at the canal at 0800. It's 5 miles from Mattapoisett to the entrance to the canal. I encourage you to look up the information and rules on navigating the canal. Sails you can have your main up, but you can't sail through the canal. You don't want to go against the current. It runs like hell. And there are ships going through there with you. The bridges are all high enough. You don't have to worry. They're 80, 90 feet up. And it's quite an experience. You'll be through in about 2 hours at most. And if you need fuel, for some reason, at the very eastern end is a little tiny basin, and you can pick up fuel in there before you cross over. The Woods Hole, or Cape Cod Maritime Academy is there. And Enterprise is usually anchored as you enter the western end. And some of the architecture on the bridges are pretty unique. And all along the way is a bike path, and you'll see a lot of people out doing their thing. As you enter the eastern side, or I guess northern side in this case, from that point, it's about 150 miles to Rockland. Leaving in the morning, like we will be, or late morning, is the perfect time to leave, because that means you will be entering the area just north of Cape Cod at the middle of the day. It's 25 miles, so it'll be maybe mid-afternoon. And that is the time when you're likely to see whales. Many times I've left the canal in the evening and crossed in the dark, and you miss this. It's quite a sight. And to see the humpback whales waving to you as you go along is really something you will never forget. A lot of fishing boats out there. This is a swordfish boat. They're very distinctive with their long harpoon trail in the end. And you'll be arriving, regardless of whether you're a fast boat or a slow boat, you'll be arriving in Maine in the following during the daylight time. It's really a pretty good idea to do that, because there's a lot of places to go bump as you enter the coast of Maine. You can see there's lights everywhere. It's all very well charted. I encourage you to have on board not only your plotter, but also an iPad or some sort of a secondary navigation electronic item. I personally like using the Navionic charts on an iPad, and the iPad you want is not the Wi-Fi enabled iPad, but the cellular iPad that has an actual GPS in it. I use that as my secondary navigation. One thought though is when you do have an iPad turned up bright enough to see during the day, it eats the battery pretty quick. So if there's a way to plug it in with an extension cord, or I have a USB plug in my cockpit, several that I can plug it into. It's pretty handy to have it as a secondary thing. And this is not the course I specifically recommend, but I just plotted the course that I would likely do. But you can see there's a lot of places to get into trouble. To the left of this mess of islands here is another channel called Mussel Ridge. That's a pretty spectacular place to go, but you want to make sure that you're ready to keep your spurs active or some sort of prop cutter, which brings me to the point of lobster pots. There are literally millions of lobster pots in Maine. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details on that, but you do not want to go to Maine without some sort of a cutter on your propeller. We'll talk about that in a minute. You don't want to run into a lobster pot, and it might be easy enough to say, well, you know, I'll hook it or something like that. But the reality is, if you tangle in it, you're going swimming in 50-degree water. That is very unpleasant. And I recommend you carry at least a shorty wetsuit, if not a full wetsuit with a hood and everything else, because that water is really, really chilling. Welcome to Maine. It is absolutely spectacular. This is the first big lighthouse you'll see, and this is right before you come around the corner going into Rockland. And this is where we're going to rendezvous spend a couple of days. I built an extra day or two into the schedule to allow for delays. And I was on the phone with our caterer today. We're going to have an arrival dinner. It is active in Maine. Everybody's going back, and it's a little challenging to get things organized, but we've got everything lined up. We're just picking a venue at this point, excuse me. In making sure you have adequate information available to yourself while you're in Maine, Bennett will talk about the TAF guide, but that on the left is the Bible for Maine. I recommend you have a copy of that on board, a current copy. The TAFs are no longer doing this. This Curtis Reinlob is doing it. But the point is, I've been going since the 80s, and I've never been there without a copy of this guide on board. And the waterway guide is a good thing to have too. I wouldn't call it it's not as indispensable as the other one, but it will give you, if you have run into trouble or need repairs or things like that, it'll give you something to use as a resource. And of course, Active Captain works quite well. Now, you'll see the upper right, you'll see a prop cutter, a warp cutter. This is what I have on Pandora. There's two options. Well, this one is actually threaded into the strut, and it works extremely well. You hit one wrap and the line is cut. It'll even cut a thin piece of wire. The one below that is something you can install while the boat is in the water. And that particular one is called a shaft shark. And you just have to know the diameter of your shaft, and a diver can put it on for you with a couple of set screws. And I mentioned those two options just because if you don't want to hold your boat, just to put that on. Personally, I've had them both. The shaft shark works, but you end up with a wad of tangle on your propeller you've got to pull off with a boat hook. So you're better off with but believe me, you want one of these on your boat. You also want to be prepared for big tides. This is a typical view of a harbor. They dry out at low tide in many cases, and then they fill up. You're talking 10-foot tides. And the further east you go, the higher the tides. So you want to take that into account when you anchor. Almost any anchor will work in Maine because it's heavy mud in most cases. I can't emphasize the beauty of the place. It's pretty spectacular. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but there's a lot going on. And off here to the left is Rockland, where my cursor is. And from here to Bar Harbor is off to the east. And you could spend an entire season doing nothing but going back and forth from those two areas. And we're going to spend our little mini cruise in the upper part of Penobscot Bay up here. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And as you're going along, you might see some of these boats. You may have heard of the group Outward Bound, which is a group where the kids get together and go out and live off of the wilderness for a couple of weeks. It's a iconic organization, and this is not their current boat. This is a relatively old picture, but these are open boats and they camp between the islands. And then, of course, the schooners, and they are amazing, absolutely beautiful. And you will see them sailing. They don't have motors. They actually will, just sail right into a harbor. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about our mini cruise, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bennett. This is after a couple of days in Newport, in Rockland, we're going to take a short sail. It's about 10 miles over to Pulpit Harbor. And you can see that's off to the right. And it is a tiny little hurricane hole. It's called Pulpit Harbor because of Pulpit Rock. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, but it's very common to see schooners anchored in this area here or over here. This is a favorite spot of mine coming into there. And if you spend time there, and we won't have a lot of time, we're just going to spend one night, you can take your dinghy down to here and walk up to this. There's a little grocery store, and there's a little airport up there. It's very, very pretty. And you will see this has had an osprey nest on it for 150 years at least. And to see a schooner coming in the evening or coming out of the fog is quite something to see. And as I mentioned, they don't have engines, so they have these little push boats. So that's day one. Day two, we're going to take a leisurely downwind sail up to Belfast. Belfast is an old industrial city. They used to render chickens up there, and it had a bad reputation for being rather stinky. But today it's this charming little New England town, and it's a beautiful spot. I've been on the phone with the harbor master and also with the folks at the shipyard, Front Street Shipyard, which is a very high-tech manufacturing and repair place for ships and boats. And they're going to give us a tour. They have some remarkable equipment there, and they're just going to share that with us. And that evening, we'll have cocktails on their deck, and then there's lots of restaurants in town, or you can eat on board your boat. You'll need to reserve a mooring. We're going to eat up all their moorings, pretty much. Some of them we can raft on, some we can't, and we'll be getting details to you on that, and you'll want to reach out to them according to the itinerary and make a reservation. I should have mentioned that the first night in Pulpit, we'll probably do some sort of maybe a rafting where two boats on one hook. We got to work on that if it's calm, and then have cocktails and maybe a couple of big boats. I know Alex has a nice new 40-foot catamaran that he just brought back from France. He could certainly want to share his transatlantic experience, the first one he did, and we'll have a great time. So we'll then have cocktails and dinner with a group of people up in Belfast, but nothing specifically organized. It's a pretty straightforward harbor. It's loaded with, there's some area for anchoring, but it can be a little unsettled. So we're going to want to pick up moorings back in this area and to leave it up to yourself. But I talked to Kathy at the harbor master today, and they're ready for us to reserve. It's a charming little New England town. You'll really enjoy being there. So our final day of the mini cruise will be to go about 15 miles over to Bucks Harbor, who amazingly is owned, Bucks Harbor Marine is owned by a guy named John Buck, no relation to Bucks Harbor. He bought the place a few years ago. It's a lovely spot to visit. I just want to note that they say that if you don't like the weather in Maine, wait 5 minutes. It's very common to have thunderstorms come roaring through there. They're usually not too violent, not like they are down in, say, Florida and the southern states, but they do get rather sporty. And after that, you may have a nice mist, or maybe the fog will set in, and sometimes you can't see your hand in front of your face. So radar is always kind of nice to have. And if you don't have that, or you're not comfortable, do buddy boating, but don't just stumble around in the dark. There's the old fishermen say that the best way to navigate Maine is using potatoes. And the idea is to take a bag of potatoes up on the down and throw them in front of you. And if they don't splash, you know you're too close to shore. So I just can't tell you how much I really love Maine. It is a really spectacular place. And when we spend some time here in Bucks Harbor Marine is off to this area. John has told me he has barely enough moorings, but he's going to raft us up on his dock 3 deep. And we're working out the details of probably we'll do a potluck grill. He's going to set up some grills. And then the following morning, Wednesday, the last day that we're formally together, we're going to have coffee and donuts on the dock and go through charts, and everyone can share ideas of where to go. As I said earlier, there is an endless number of places you can go in Maine. I spent 15 summers there and never got tired of it. And one of my favorite spots just down the road from Bucks Harbor is Eggemogan Reach and Wooden Boat School. And you just cannot find a better sunset than what you will see in visiting Maine. So I'm very excited to have all of you along. And after Bennett finishes with some overview of some of the things to think about as you head down east, we can start talking about your questions. So I'm really pleased you've signed up with us. And here's my information. I'll put it up at the end to make sure that everybody has the ability to reach out, and don't hesitate. I take all this is my job. It's important to me. Volunteer, of course, but it's just terrific. So Bennett.
All right, let's see if I can shoot my screen save in here. And Bob, you're going to tell me if you see anything good.
I see it.
All right.
You're going to want to pick your PowerPoint. There you go.
All right. Is that looking good, Bob?
It looks great.
Okay. Sort of flashing gray. Now, where'd it go?
Hit your, are you using 2 screens?
No.
Okay.
That is odd. Let's go come out.
There you go. It's coming.
Okay, but why? It's kicking off. That's not good. All right, let's see if we can improvise here.
I can put it up on mine if you like, Bennett.
Yeah, well, let's see. I think I may have it running now. If it doesn't knock itself out, I'm sorry. Let's see if we can get it going. All right, maybe the first slide is bad. So the first slide was there it is, picture of New York and Maine. So the problem with cruising in Maine is there's so much to see. It's huge. So it's sort of like Manhattan on the side. Look at the right side. The streets on the left of the screen here down west are in a north-south direction, kind of like Manhattan, the avenues. But when you get to where we're going to be, Penobscot and the Bar Harbor area, if you go that far, it's more like Boston. I don't even understand Boston, at least New York I get. Boston has thoroughfares and ins and outs that are mind-boggling, and I think it's a pretty good analogy. So let's see if we can go to the next slide. There we go. The circle again, Rockland, and you get a lay of the land where we have Penobscot Bay, and we have the Bar Harbor area, which is off to the east on the right side of the slide. So more west in the Muscongas Bay and the Mid-Coast region, see all these north and south rivers, and you can't get anywhere from here, as they say. Probably try it again later in the talk. But anyway, the Maine can't get there from here idea is sort of the inverse, mirror image. If you're on a boat and in the water, you may want to go to this next river, which you can walk to, but it's impossible to get to without doing a whole day's worth of activities. On the other hand, in Penobscot, it's more of the Boston approach, as I mentioned. So it's good when you get to learn the lay of the land. So the lay of the land is very well described in 2 places. When you sign up for the rally, you'll get access to a couple-page but excellent description from Hank and Seal, George, who go over all these places. They've had a lot of experience similar to Bob's. I've actually had 30 or 40 trips to Maine, but mostly by car, so I guess that doesn't count. 4 or 5 cruises. They've been different areas, so I feel like I have a taste of a little, and I can't wait to go back as well. Again, the guide has it all. If you don't have one, just get one. It's got everything. So here's a little depiction of how to get around. Again, you can see Rockland, and Bob's leaving everybody off here, maybe, or maybe we're all staying together. And that's going to be in Bucks. So there are a number of different ways you can get around if you want to stay in Penobscot. You could go south and west and come back where you came from, kind of place, and then spend, again, a whole season in everything further west and down towards home again. Alternatively, you could explore other parts of it, and not even the whole thing depicted here, but down to Ilohot. But these are the Fox Islands. I didn't even realize until I studied up that the Fox Island Thoroughfare is named for the Fox Islands, which makes sense because those are the 2 islands that are there. They just don't have the name Fox Islands. So it leads to some confusions about how things are named. And the bottom line is these east to west-ish reaches and thoroughfares get you where you want to be as long as you understand them. But you have to have this sort of overview approach. So when you make your plans, you have to kind of know where you're going, how long you're going to be there, why you're going, and where you're going to encounter along the way, which really is the bigger trick. Because along the way this way, or along the way this way, totally different venues, all unique and charming, but you have to choose along the way. You don't have to choose it today. You could be totally spontaneous and it will work just as well because, you still have weather, you still have lobster pots, you have all that stuff, and you might be in a non-lobster pot day of mine. You might just decide, forget it. 3 days here in Anchor is great. I love it. It all works. That's the point. Here it just happens to be our boat. The first day that we cruised Penobscot, we pulled into an anchorage. It was off of Warren Island, which is west of Islesboro. And we did not know that the next boat over until we studied it was the next door neighbor at our local marina in Barrington, Rhode Island. The next slip, they were. So it was kind of amazing and very welcoming. And you'll have a lot of company, and hopefully you'll have a lot of friends with all of us. 5,000 miles of coast in total means there's a lot of lighthouses. So you've got Dice Head Light off of Kashdan near Bucks. You have Pumpkin Island Lighthouse on the west side of the Eggemogan Reach. Here's Eagles Light a little further south than Deer Island. It's the one thing I like about the lighthouse is I could take pictures and I could go back, and it's the one thing I could identify using Google Earth, because all the rest of my pictures look exactly the same. But these have enough cues that I can go back and if I didn't write it down, or if it didn't have the timestamp or whatever the tag, then you can do it that way. So I'm kind of old school there. Here is a Brown Marina. It's just one of the many classic places. This is in the Fox Islands. It's on the Fox Islands Thoroughfare between North Haven and Vinyl Haven. Just a great one of a gazillion great places. Seal Harbor, which is Seal Bay. Perfect example to mess you up. Seal Bay is appropriately named. It's beautiful, a good example of, it's on Vinyl Haven, but there's a Seal Cove that's around the other side, and Seal Bay and Seal Cove, like many other places, the point is that there are a huge number of duplications of names all through Maine. We'll talk about that in just a second some more. But this is just one of those beautiful places right in the backyard of where we're going to be. That's the anchorage. A little tricky because boats can be together. There's some ledge, But again, this is more anchor than mooring. So you'll find plenty of anchorages once you get off the beaten path. So this gives a good time to review this a name situation, which is that there are islands, there are towns, and there are harbors. And Vinyl Haven, for example, that's an island. It's also a village, which is a specific place. And it's not a harbor because that's Carver's Harbor. So it gets confusing when you start to study it, when you communicate it, when you plan. There's more than one of almost everything. So like I said, Seal Bay versus Cove, there's another seal thing further east. Fox Islands versus the tiny Fox Island, which is nearby. Next to Seal Bay is Winter Harbor, which is the anchorage that I showed you. It's right next, it's the entrance to Seal Bay. But there's a Winter Harbor up by Bar Harbor. So that's confusing. The best one is Mistake Harbor versus Mistake Island Harbor. So Mistake Harbor is a mistake and Mistake Island Harbor is a gem. And it's in the book, but you can be confused if you're not sort of aware of the possibilities. All right, let's go on to the next one, which is sort of how I look at the next area. So the Mount Desert area and Acadia National Park and Bar Harbor, the town. So this is the whole Bar Harbor, Acadia, Mount Desert area. And you'll be coming through from Penobscot in a number of those small thoroughfares, which we won't go into now, but they're identified, and these are the ways you get there. These are the ways you get there from the ocean, and it's a little bit more straightforward from the outside to come in. Another point is the point about sailing around Mount Desert Island. I was amused by this because you can sail around, but you can't sail around. So there's the little X there. So there is no race around Mount Desert Island. You probably could walk it, but you can't get there from here. Let's see, that's about it for that slide, I think. All right, so just a word about Acadia. So it's a don't miss. You don't have to do it this trip. You just have to do it in life. But if you are there, then it's a don't miss. So a couple things I learned about yesterday is that the bus system, which is really the mainstay of getting around Bar Harbor, and it works perfectly normally, it's limited this year. So these are the routes. You normally are all around here. And this still is some Acadia National Park, obviously, and so that's great. This is Bar Harbor. You still can get the buses from the main bus station. They're free, I think, and they are going to be limited, though. So they're going to be limited in terms of routes, and they're going to be limited in terms of numbers of people. So that's something I just read, and be aware of it, because it's a little disappointing for getting around. So on the other hand, you have a boat. So that's excellent. But a combination of the buses and the boats is really perfect in normal times. So I'll talk just a bit about the high points. You've got, I'm not even going to talk about Southwest Harbor, Hinkley Yachts area, or Northeast Harbor, because they're so quintessential and important. You can do that on your own, and they are great stops, but they're really all moorings. You really can't anchor there. So take a mooring, they're available. You just call ahead. I'm pretty sure they reserve them. But we like some of the other places because of the anchorages that are available as well. And they're also a little off the beaten path. So I'll talk about just a few of them to get your feet wet. So Somme Sound is the only fjord. So if I go back, can I go back? Let's see if I go back. This is the Somme Sound, which takes you up the middle. And it's a true fjord, the only one in the east. And sorry, wrong way. And it's spectacular. Sailing or motoring up, it's easy, it's straight. Some weird winds can shoot through here, but the scenery is spectacular. At the head of the harbor, anchor anywhere you want. We happen to be right next to this small boat. Total surprise, because there are no other boats anchored. So to see a boat like this, which should be, in Newport or in Martha's Vineyard was up there. And they're just hiding away there, I'm sure, for their next charter guests or whatever. But it's beautiful up there. And here's an example of the town of Soamesville. It's gorgeous and great walking. Normally you can pick up the bus shuttle from there, but you can't now. That's not part of the routes. Bar Harbor itself is another, great place to be. The actual anchorage is, trying to get my screen to show that spot. The actual anchorage and moorings are here south of the bar. And there's moorings and anchorage there, but we often anchor on the north side of the bar. Not the greatest holding, but it's fine. And what an amazing sight to wake up in the morning and see this. There's a cruise ship on the other side of the bar, these little dots of people walking across the bar back and forth until the tide comes back up. And, you got to get your last train back to the mainland before you eliminate the path. And that's an island. It's hard to distinguish it from another cruise ship. But it's very busy in the summer. I don't know what it's going to be like this year in Bar Harbor. It's but the actual rest of the island, you can scoot away and be out of the mainstream pretty easily. The next one is the sailing around Mount Desert. This is the south part. This is Thunder Hole, an amazing from this land spectacle of the roar when the conditions are right or wrong, and mansions galore. So again, great sailing. Just watch the lobster pots. Pick your days. Acadia itself, just spectacular. It's just an amazing gem, and you all know of it. So there's no point in me just singing the praises. Just a couple of more slides about Downeast sailing, if I could. I missed the little cranberry slide. Where's the little cranberry slide? Little cranberry got off the presentation. Little Cranberry is another great place to be. It's an island off of Acadia and Mount Desert, and it's worth a stop as well. So anyway, back to Downeast. So Downeast sailing is really, now you guys are, you may or may not do Downeast. Probably most of you aren't. So it's the Downeast Rally, but this is Downeast. This is true Downeast. So once you pass Winter Harbor and the point, you're truly Downeast. It is raw. It's unpopulated. It's awesome. It is something to experience. I'll show you a few of the places that are in the Maine U.S. side that we've gone to, but we've also been up into Passamaquoddy Bay. We've been to Grand Manan Island. We've been to Yarmouth on different years. Also spectacular, but Canada's still closed, or that's why we canceled the Maritime, unfortunately, which might be next year. Machias Seal Island is another place that is off of south of Grand Manan. It's a puffin colony. You can't go to the island, but you can sail up to it. You can anchor and you can watch the colony. Mistake Harbor back on the mainland is near Rokes, which is the classic anchorage for the Downeast. We've actually just sailed by it, never anchored there, but it does look beautiful. But Mistake Island Harbor and the islands is a gem if you get up that far. We found it's a nice straight across to get to Yarmouth as well. So we staged there for the trip to Yarmouth the next day. It reminds me of a quick lobster pot story, and it's worthy of mentioning that my cousin, who is not normally with me, saw that the next morning, one of the lobster pots, we'll call it Red, was no longer there. So I quizzed him 100 times. Are you sure it was there last night? Are you sure it was there last night? Until he actually said, I'm so sure I'll jump in the water and I'll pull it off of the prop, which is exactly what I was trying to get accomplished anyway. So he did. I gave him the wetsuit and he jumped in, and he was right. the red warp. It was completely around the prop. So one thing I learned, and I actually see it's in the book. I didn't even know that one sentence in the book does say, you should keep a mental note of the lobster pots that are next to you when you go to sleep, because you may be all over the place overnight, and when you wake up, you need to see that they're all accounted for. I think it's a really good tip that we stumbled upon and that they recommend. Maritime Rally 2022, real fast. That's the route. Be there. Last slides, the islands that are off distance. They're day trips or even anchorages, overnights. So just want to mention a few that we've been to. Matinicus is an amazing place we'll show pictures of. Monhegan and the Seguin Islands. I'm probably saying it wrong. And that's after a couple years of French, but whatever. So we have the amazing Matinicus is a true lobster enclave. Really everything, all the lives here revolve around lobstering. There are no pleasure boats here, which leads me to tell you how to do it. It's in the book, but what you want to do is call the lobsterman who, his name Josh Ames, it's in the book. You call him ahead of time to say, make sure, and then even still, you're not guaranteed that he can place you, but usually he will say, come on over the next day. And then the next day he will put you on a mooring, and he could draft you. He could, he knows which lobster boats are out for a while. He puts you on the moorings. And again, how spectacular is it as you go around these slides? The next morning in this lower right is all the lobster boats getting ready to go out that were in front of you overnight. They wake you up at 5 in the morning, but it's spectacular. They don't even wake you up. You just want to be awake to see the show. The library was my favorite. All these municipal buildings look like this. That's the inside of the library. Monhegan Island is another gem. It's an artist enclave. It's got a long, rich history. You can get a mooring. It's also subject to filling up, so plan ahead for that, and you can stay overnight. This is what happened on the first year of cruising in Monhegan. We got our first taste of putting out enough line to account for the tides, go off for a 4-hour hike. And I was so proud of myself that I did all the right things. Ridiculous. I did all the wrong things. And there's the boat needing to be anchored, rescued, but no big deal, because all that seaweed, it's so slippery that you rescue the boat, it just slides right over the rocks. And Seguin Island, another gem. It's a lighthouse. It's not an overnight anchorage. There are a couple moorings you could just pick up. You can see it from the coast when you go south. So if you see that, you could take your binoculars and see there's one boat, maybe go over there and spend the day. But you might be beaten out, and then you can't anchor there and you can't be overnight, but you can visit the lighthouse. Again, it's an amazing place. So that's it for me and Downeast, and we could take some questions about any of this. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bennett. I'm going to kick off the questions with one that's popped up a bunch of times. You feel free to put questions into the chat box as we go along. The question is, I've emphasized prop cutters, and the questions, a number of questions saying, should we not go if we don't have a prop cutter? That's a difficult question to answer. I know people that manage to avoid lobster pots. For example, if you're going with the tide, they stream out, and you just go between them if you're going up with the tide or down with the tide. But if you're crossing the tide, and Bennett talked a lot about going east to west, but if you're crossing the tide, it's really hard, especially when you get further east, where they use what's called toggles, where they have to keep the prop warps from tangling up on the bottom. They have two buoys, a little one and a big one, that are about 20 feet apart. And sometimes it's hard to tell which toggle goes with which buoy. And you may not hit them, but then again, more often than not, you're going to hit one at some point. But that's why I mentioned that there's two different ways to deal with prop cutters. I think the sail drives, you have to have the boat out of the water to do that. Hank might want to comment on that. But I would recommend, if you can put the prop cutter on, a spurs is your best bet, but that boat has to be out of the water for that. The other option is just one that wraps around the shaft. The one key part about putting a shaft type of product on is you have to make sure you don't jam it up against your stuffing, against your cutlass bearing, because then you'll burn your propeller without having proper water flow through the cutlass bearing. But if you talk to the manufacturer, they will explain it. So the way I would do it is if you know that you have at least a couple of inches between the back of, it goes up against the hub of your propeller. And when you put your hub on, it uses up the full taper. So if you know you have, say, 4 inches, you have enough. Then go down in your bilge, measure the propeller shaft to make sure you're exactly certain of what size it is. It'll be the same size as your zincs. And have a diver or install it yourself. Probably a diver is a good idea. It's done with a couple of set screws. But honestly, I would not recommend. It's just going to be stressful if you don't have some way to protect yourself to get a tangled propeller.
So I'm going to jump in before Hank, if you don't mind, and I'm going to give you an opposite point of view, because then Hank is going to be the arbiter of this, because I'll present a different point of view. So we never had a cutter. We never have, and I don't think we ever will. But not to say it's miserable going in the water. That's why I convinced my cousin to do it. It's also, but on the other hand, let me go through the thinking on first of all, I would not cancel the rally if you don't have one. That's number one. Second, you can be vigilant. So it really relies on teamwork. You have to be, so a couple of things. When you're sailing, it's less of a risk. So number one, if you're going to, motor all the time, you have to be more cognizant. Not to say that you can't snag something between your rudder and your keel or whatever. There's other places it can snag. Even with a cutter, there's other places that you can grab. It's not going to wrap, of course. So there's that. The actual sailing part, I really don't worry too much because I think that the risk is much, much less. The third thing is that if you are careful and you have somebody, you don't have to be on the bow for this. You can be in the cockpit. And if you're in a position where you can watch what's happening, your chances are much, much decreased that you're going to get into trouble. So that's my take on it. And Hank.
Yeah, I guess on Bob's earlier question or comment about on sail drives, yes, you would have to have the boat out of the water to put the cutters on. In the comments, I mentioned Ambassador Marine, and they, those are shipped in from England, but you get them within a couple of days. They're pretty quick. But that's a good unit, but you do have to have the boat out of the water, and you usually have to machine, have the hub of your prop machined a bit, in some cases as much as about a 1/4 inch to fit those in. So it's something that's hard to do last minute, but you do have to be out of the water. So the other question of sailing without, we had a Ted Brewer 38 that we took to Maine 4 times without cutters on it. It was modified fin keel, skeg hung rudder. So there was the prop was somewhat open. We have a number of friends that sail more traditional boats that are full keel with an aperture for the prop, and you don't even need to bother with cutters for that. The keel protects you. So anyway, just a few thoughts, but we have quite a few friends that, like Bennett, continue not to put cutters on. They'll have a wetsuit and a knife, and that's their fallback. And it's like about once every 3rd trip that they then have to get in the water and take care of it. It's not that frequent, as long as you're careful. Well, one of the little tricks is that the lobster floats. It's a foam float with a stick through it, and they have a stick so that they can sometimes do some figure-8 wraps with the lead line, so that they may not put as much line out with the float. If you look at the float and it's laying on its side, you pass on the side where the stick is. not the side where the line goes. And so the line will be, stretched out by the current, or if there's no current, stretched a little bit by the wind. So if you stay on that side of it, you're fine. And similar with toggle, what you'll find is that the toggle will have two floats in line. The line in between them may be 20 or 30 feet, but there really is not enough line there and catch an area on the line for you to go through with your sailboat between them. But the second one, if you're not clear, well, which is the one, that's not being, that is not directly connected to the lobster pod. It's indirectly connected, but through the other float. So the one that is the last in line in that sequence will generally be laying on its side. The other one is pulled taut, often underwater or sitting, fairly tight. The other one's just laying lazily on its side. So you know which one to go around. You stay outside of that one. So anyway, probably enough said there. I'll turn it back to you,
Well,
Bob.
let me qualify it as well. My boat, from the back of my fin to my rudder, is 10 feet, and it is very prone to catching buoys. But if you have a full keel, as Hank says, very little risk. I think that I've got a wife who doesn't like to go swimming in cold water, and me neither. So that's my particular purpose. But please don't cancel as a result of that. Just make sure you're really, really careful. Another question that came up about moorings in Newport. We're going to be posting information in the captain's on details of arranging moorings. There are opportunities to reserve, but most moorings in Newport are first come, first served. With rare exception, I anchor in Newport. There's lots of room. With as many boats as we have, perhaps it might be more challenging. If you need, just call them on the radio. Call ahead and talk to them about that if you want to do that. But I think we'll probably be okay. Another question had to do with the bigger boat, Sunsets, 65 feet. There'll be no problem in Newport. I mean, they have 100+ foot boats in Newport, although they may have more limited number of moorings for big boats. In Rockland, there's plenty of room to anchor. I don't know what the limit is on boat length. But we can find out that. There is room to anchor up in Belfast. If they can't accommodate, I would suggest that you contact the folks at either the Front Street Shipyard or the town docks. As I mentioned earlier, that information is either available online or we can get that for you. And then finally at Bucks Harbor, it's going to be tight, but I suspect John Buck will find a way to accommodate you. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. It will be crowded for sure. Let's see. And in terms of charts, there's various sources. One of the things I would emphasize is if you don't have a current chip on your plotter, you can certainly download the most current information or your iPad, but there's so many buoys, so many navigation marks in Maine, you do not want to confuse them by any stretch, because it's not soft like the Chesapeake, it's granite. But just map tech is perfectly good, and getting active captain on your map tech is a good idea. And I always make sure I have the big chart kits too, all of them, just to have an extra point of reference. Another question is the usual procedure for topping up fuel after reaching Newport. There's adequate places to get fuel in Newport, and it'll be in the guide, the waterway guide, no problem there. And let's see what else. Need to stop for a night between Newport and Rockland for sleep. That's potential. I meant like Hank comment on that. It's an overnight. Unless you're going to add 3 days to get there, you won't be able to get there very quickly, because you first of all got to make sure that you got adequate conditions to do that. But it's 100 plus 50 miles, and the most you're going to be able to do in the course of a day is 50 or 70 miles. And so you'll miss a lot of the activities. But I wouldn't, one of the purposes of this run is to get comfortable with being out overnight. And one of the things we'll do is make sure that you can buddy boat with boats that are about the same speed as you. I would not, having spoken to many people over the years and done a lot of overnights, I still remember vividly my very first overnight when we left Cape Cod Canal, and I got a few miles out. It was 8 o'clock at night and getting dark. And I thought to myself, I have no business being out here. I am not going to make it. And we did. And it wasn't a big deal at all. And I encourage you to take on an extra crew if you're uncomfortable with that. It's a major step and a milestone to become comfortable sailing overnight. And no matter what, you will get comfortable with it. And that will open up many other worlds for you. Certainly you can do it. Of the 15 times I've been to Maine, I've only bumped down the coast once because the run overnight, one of the nice things about the Northeast is the wind generally is less strong at night, and you'll probably end up motoring for most of the way. And it is very, very pleasant, and the opportunity to see the stars and the moon if it's up. I don't remember what the phase of the moon is, but it's pretty spectacular. Hank, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would echo everything you said. I agree with all of that. The comment or the question said going from Newport to Rockland. And so obviously there are a couple of stops after Newport in Cuttyhunk and then also Mattapoisett.
I'm sorry, I didn't know,
that's okay. Yeah, no worries, Bob. And so, but, as Bob pointed out, then from Mattapoisett on up, 150 miles into Rockland, and it's a fun trip. It's easy. Once you get through the canal, it's pretty much a direct shot all the way on up to Penobscot Bay. And when we, for those going, and we get around to a captain's briefing, we'll have some input on suggested waypoints and that sort of thing. But I guess the other thing I would add is if you decide to make stops, you may very well find that it takes 3 or 5 more days to get all the way up to Rockland, trying to do it in day hops, and also day hops where you have favorable weather. You increase the chances of getting some adverse weather. If you've got a nice weather window to just go right through the night, well, then you're there. As Bob said, travel with a buddy boat. We've done it with even some first-time solo sailors, and we had them nearby, said, look, leave your radio on, keep it right next to your ear, go ahead and lie down for 15 minutes, set a loud timer, get up, check around. But if we see anything, we'll raise you on the radio. And so, so we assisted them, in making that passage that way. But, if you can have other crew, even if it just gives you a chance for getting an hour's rest and then get up and handle the boat for a few more hours, then get another hour's rest, that'll make all the difference, having more crew. Back to you, Bob.
Yeah,
I'll just throw in.
Even those of us, I can tell you, my wife and I, when we went to Cuba a few years ago, we were in Fort Pierce, Florida, talking to another couple, and Brenda was anxious about the overnight. And this woman said, oh, the first time I did an overnight, I was curled up in a fetal position down in the cabin. I was terrified. And this is a woman who sailed all through the Caribbean. So it's just a matter of doing it the first time. Did I hear someone trying to ask?
I was just going to add a couple of things. So I think it's dependent on, first of all, I think you should do the overnight 100%. If you want to do stops, do it on the way back, because there's strategic reasons to do it that way too, because you're going, upwind essentially with the southwest prevailings. And that's your opportunity to stop if you really want to. But really, the question is, are you up to it? So if you're here, you're up to it. So I think you should do it. That's the best way to put it. Now, that having been said, you know who your partner is. So I know of a story. I went on my very first Bermuda run before I even had a blue water cruiser with a different organization. And I wound up hearing a story where the guy that had the most beautiful passport, 50 or 46 or whatever, his wife came along, she was reluctant, And the next year I saw him, he sold a boat. So guess what? So that's an experience that you don't want to have because you're going to potentially poison cruising forever. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And what Hank said, I agree with. Err on the side of taking another crew. You don't even have to know the person. We have crew. There's probably people that are itching to come. So that's a good way to do it. Back to you, Bob.
Yeah, to that point, Brendan and I have sailed basically from Eastern Maine to Key West, all through the Bahamas, to Cuba, all the way down to Grenada. And honestly, she hates overnight. She never really got the hang of it, but she's done it. I mean, she did the whole run from St. Lucia back to Florida, 1,500 miles. And during the pandemic, she didn't like that either, but she did. But what she does now for the long stuff, and in fact, going to Maine this summer, she's just going to drive up and meet me. Because she's like been there, done that, and I'm going to spend 5 months on the boat this winter. You can go by yourself. So you have to be flexible. Otherwise, it's going to be a real short trip. You know, you can convince them or fool them once, but you're not going to fool them again and again. So another question about lobster pots. The question is, are there lobster pots only in water of certain depths? Pretty much everywhere from about 10 feet of water to 50, 80 feet, 100 feet, there'll be pots. They tend to be more inshore. There are offshore pots, but they're very different. The offshore pots are long strings that are weighted down with a single buoy at either end. So there might be 50 pots on that single string, but the odds of hitting that are very slim because the lines are sinking lines. They don't float. So it's pretty much an inshore thing, but in some of the bays, it looks like sprinkles on ice cream. There's so many of them. But I don't want to overemphasize. Don't stay away from Maine. I am lobster pot adverse for sure, mostly because Brenda doesn't like drama on board. But we've duked it out with the pots, and it's fine. Obviously, don't want to cut them if you can avoid that. But you know, they put them in the channels. They put them next to the docks. They're everywhere. Let's see, question about pump out. Newport has pump out boat. There'll be pump out in Cuttyhunk. There'll be pump out in Mattapoisett. Anytime you're in the open ocean, of course, you don't need to pump out. You just pump out. The whales poop in the water too, you know. But in the harbors in Maine, there are pump outs available. There's some big heavy currents in Maine, and if you're going between islands and you're pretty close to the ocean and the tide's running out, I think it's probably okay. I don't know what the rules are up there nowadays. Do you know, Bennett?
Caught me by surprise. No, I just use common sense. Anywhere where there's the chance that you're going to spoil a harbor or or have something wash ashore, just don't do it.
No.
And then conversely, you can go out. There are plenty of places to pump out, but if you want to, you can just discharge out far enough if you're making one of those passages. So
Fair
yeah.
enough. Okay, I think I've covered all the questions in the chat. Are there any questions, any last minute questions? Well, great. I'm gonna put up my screen here. This is my contact information, and I'm in the book. I'm responsible for this rally, and I want you folks to feel that you can reach out to me. And I really appreciate you being a part of this. We're going to have a record number of boats this year. I'm very excited about that. I love crowds, I love people, and I love hanging out on Pandora and sharing stories with everybody else. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be getting together. Right now, my lower rudder bearing's being repaired. The boat had to come out of the water, so wish me luck. The parts are coming from Europe, but they promised me I'll be in Newport on the 10th of July to meet up with all you folks. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks, Hank. Thanks, Bennett. And thank you all for being with us today. Thanks, Barbara.
Bob, it looks like we did miss one question.
Oh.
It says active captain shows an anchorage north of Mount Desert Island within walking distance of Bar Harbor Airport. Is that anchorage okay for more than a day anchorage?
I'm going to let Bennett respond to that. Okay, he's obviously gone. What I recommend is that you check in active captain and take a look at that. I have never been up there. What I would do is I would take a shuttle from Bar Harbor. It's much simpler.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me now. I was muted. Yeah, I don't think you want to be up that far north, right by the shallows in there. There are anchorages that are closer, but again, you can get there from Bar Harbor pretty easily via an Uber. So I think that's the way I would do it. Hank, any further insight?
Well, no, I think that's right. And that's Doug Weibel. I can get back to Doug, with some further info on that offline, but I agree with you. I think that's up fairly far. It probably wouldn't be issues in terms of, wind unless you're getting some, northeaster or something like that blowing on in. But I think otherwise it would probably be okay. But I think it is a bit shallow. I think Doug has a smaller boat, as I recall. So, I mean, it may work out. So I'll work with Doug separately on that.
Anything else? Last call. Well, thank you again, everybody. And I look forward to hearing from you and meeting all of you in Newport. So sail safe.
All right, thanks, everyone. We'll call it a day.